Hello, welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's crypto policy update for November 2023. My name is Ron Quaranta, co-host with my dear friend Adam Goldberg. Before we begin, obviously, please keep in mind that everything discussed here should not be considered accounting, investment, legal, tax, or I guess regulatory and legislative advice, Adam. And then obviously everything that Adam and I are talking about today should be considered our own personal opinion and not necessarily the opinions of our firms. We don't have our dear friend Dina Ellis with us today. She'll be back next month. She's been very busy as well. So shout out to Dina. As with all of these kind of sessions that we do, chat should be available for everyone watching. So please do submit questions for Adam or I. If you don't get to that, certainly info@wsba.co, and we'll answer the questions later on. Adam, since the last time we did a policy update, I feel like so much has happened. It gets hard to keep up. And I always send these, hey, Adam, Dina, what do you think? We'll discuss these bullet points and here's some of the news. And you remind me every time correctly that, by the way, you should talk about X, Y, and Z. So it's been a pretty busy month. And I wanted to start off with something that might seem, it's a very difficult series of conversations for a lot of folks, particularly given some world events. But you raised a really interesting point. Recently, the Wall Street Journal reported on the use of crypto financing for illicit finance and terrorist organizations, for example, the conflict in Gaza with Hamas. And there was a lot of industry pushback on, look, you're looking at this data wrong. And I believe it was one of the more prominent crypto forensic firms, and even a competing firm said, hey, Wall Street Journal, you got some of this data wrong. And they printed sort of an update. I wouldn't call it a retraction, but that didn't resonate well from a policy perspective in DC. Tell us what happened and kind of what's the perspective that you've got on those events?
Yeah, so the initial Wall Street Journal piece was talking about Hamas's known use of cryptocurrencies and digital assets to finance some of their operation. This was a policy they had going back a few years, and principally they were using Bitcoin. And one of the things that happened is around the 2019 time period, they basically said, well, people are tracking our Bitcoin transactions back to us, stealing our wallets, things, well, not stealing our wallets, but having sanctions enforcement take down those wallets.
Yeah.
So they changed tactics. One of the biggest contentions in the original Wall Street Journal piece was that basically actually this was a good story about crypto and digital assets because it helped trace some of the terrorist financing, and basically they were maligning the whole industry without giving specifics and details. The way the Wall Street Journal decided to respond to that criticism, and it was pretty heavy from the industry, was it would seem, and it seems there was also an incentive from US and Israeli intelligence officials to similarly respond to this article. And what happened was they produced a updated version of the article this past, I believe it was Sunday it was released.
Yep.
And the major difference between the first article and the second article was the level of detail. In this new article, they actually named names. They named the person in Hamas who they believed was the terrorist financer that runs their crypto and digital asset operation. They went into the background, and basically it relates back to in 2019, the former head of Hamas terrorist financing, who relied heavily on the Hawala network, which, if you guys don't know, is kind of an alternative to the banking system that's very prevalent in the Arab world. That was the main way they used to fund Hamas. Israel assassinated the head of Hamas terrorist financing in 2019, and the guy that took over was much more open to digital assets and to crypto. And what this new article said, and it seems to be reliant heavily on US and Israeli intelligence officials that shared this information with the Wall Street Journal, is there are actually exchanges that are named in the article. There are specific exchanges that are named that are run out of Gaza. There are specific exchanges that are implicated in Russia and Iran. There are mixers that are named. And basically, what they did is kind of, it was essentially a full scale rebuttal of the criticisms and basically saying, yeah, sure, you could track it on the chain. But one of the problems is Hamas, like most terrorist networks, they adapt. So once they stopped using Bitcoin, they did start using alternative currencies. They said Tether and Tron were the two of the biggest ones that they used. But one of the problems was they did a lot of small individual transactions, basically hiding and layering the illicit transactions in these mini micro, maybe legitimate transactions, as the term layering in AML KYC financing.
Yeah.
And it made it incredibly hard to actually track what was going to Hamas. But once they did the forensic analysis, they were able to trace these digital wallets back to these exchanges in Gaza, and were able to see that there was financing going to Hamas using digital currencies.
And Adam, to that point, it really does. We've been talking about this, you and I, for some time, and within the industry, we've been talking about this for a few years. That publicly available cryptocurrency is probably not the smartest way to hide these kind of illicit transactions. There's certainly mixers, and there's the challenges there, and we certainly applaud efforts around uh, protecting against illicit finance. But certainly, there are still some challenges here. And I don't know if you saw the recent updates. I'm going to tear up the script a little bit, but I think it was a journal article this morning that noted that Tether is being used in this capacity as well, given that the oversight of Tether is
Yeah,
non-existent.
Tether and Tron were the two biggest notable currencies that we know
Right,
outside of Bitcoin that were being used to finance Hamas. And I think the reason this is important, and for any of our listeners, is this is going to drive activity on Capitol Hill.
right.
This is like basically if you discovered a way that Al Qaeda was getting funded post 9/11. This is a hole in the KYC AML compliance
Yep,
sanctions framework that must be closed and will be closed. And also, one of the biggest risks the industry may have is whatever solution comes about this, because of the nature of the subject, this
yep.
is not going to be a bill that's going to be heavily debated on both sides. I would imagine whatever legislative solution, this is going to be one of those that passes 420 to 15 or 430 to 5 in the House and 99 to 1 in the Senate.
It's not a bipartisan fight when we
You
talk about.
don't want to be on the side as a politician voting to keep terrorist financing open to Hamas. You just
Yep,
don't. So that's why it's going to be really important to get into the particulars, whatever the legislative solution is to address this. And there will be a legislative solution. There will be hearings on this coming up. There's just no way that they're going to leave this by the side. You just cannot have a terrorist organization that has a means of funding in this way and not address it if there are ways to address it. And already, as you've seen, the administration is addressing it. FinCEN released in their powers given to them
relative.
after 9/11 to go after mixers. I
Yep.
think that will be a major component of this. Basically, mixers in that new regulation are basically now illegal according to US law. I would imagine that will go beyond a regulation and be codified in statute. And
Yep.
then it will just be whatever else they can do to close any of these avenues that have been opened.
And Adam, it's interesting as you lay, and thank you for laying out those points. As you lay that out, one of the things we've often said within the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance and your firm and my firm and et cetera, is that, yeah, it should not be used for illicit finance. Where there are holes, let's figure out the best way to do that. So these are important conversations, but, Washington being Washington, and I'm going to go down this political rabbit hole, not necessarily because of party per se. Those headlines got rapidly picked up by some folks that are the anti-crypto army, quote unquote. I think I saw in my inbox not too long ago, there's already hearings scheduled
Yes.
about how this was reported. So, how did it get picked up on both sides of the camp in a way? Because I also often feel the truth gets obfuscated for the politics of the talking point. Am I kind of off base?
No, I don't think you're off base. I think when the initial article came out, the Digital Chamber, who probably many of our fellow WSBA members are a part of, they're a major leading policy organization and advocacy organization in the space. They came out very strongly against the Wall Street Journal article. They wanted to provide context. And they basically, what they've tried to do with what the industry has tried to do with similar stories is basically say, this is actually a good crypto story. This is
Right.
about how if you're using crypto for terrorist financing, it's easier to track and trace. The intelligence officials on the Israeli side and the US side clearly do not believe that conclusion. They do not think this is a good crypto story. They believe this is a story about how a terrorist organization got financing they otherwise should have. And one of the reasons they turned to crypto and digital assets, it's very easy to move money between markets and across international boundaries. We're talking about money going from parts of the Arab world to Russia on a darknet exchanges on Russia, going to mixers in Iran, winding up in Gaza. These are all parts of the ecosystem that would be traditionally shut out of the traditional banking system, which Hamas is shut out of the traditional banking system.
Yeah.
So that is one of the aspects where I'm trying to be more realistic when I'm having conversations with people post the update to the article, that the previous spin or the previous take the industry had just won't fly. You're not going to be able to sell this as a good crypto story. You're not going to be able to sell this as a good facet of digital assets. The best that can be done is to educate lawmakers and make sure that legitimate businesses are not caught up in whatever the response is. Make sure whatever solutions that come forward are targeted to actually address the problem
Yep.
and narrowly targeted so they don't hit industry players that are trying to work by the rules and everything. But if you're a company, you mentioned Tether, if you're a company like Tether, this is an existential problem for your business because if you are on the wrong side of US sanctions and your currency tool and token is being used for terrorist financing, that you're going to have major consequences if you're trying to interact with the traditional banking system. And
Yep.
so, as I said, it's in the interest of the industry to have these loopholes closed, but again, it's going to have to be in the most narrowly structured manner, and that's the difficulty we're dealing with here because
Yep.
this is not a bill that's going to go, whatever bill comes, it's not going to go through an extensive debate and markup. It's not going to have people arguing vociferously on both sides, I imagine. When it
Yep.
gets to the floor, I would expect whatever form it takes, it will pass overwhelmingly. And in that area, you can get very broad things that could do major harm to legitimate businesses in the industry.
Adam, to that point, and that's really important because as we talk about this, and one of our talking points was supposed to be legislation and draft legislation, which we'll get to. For the audience, tell me if I'm wrong. If we're talking about things like terrorist financing, proposed legislation, anything national security related, that jumps to the top of the legislative queue. That is not something that's going to be delayed for infighting within party, correct?
Yes, and I would assume it will be overwhelmingly bipartisan, whatever form it takes, and there will be legislative vehicles that move in the national security area. There is the National Defense Authorization Act that has to
Right.
pass every year. It could get attached to that. I know Elizabeth Warren is already trying to get her bills attached to that. There will be other bills that are going to be specifically related to Israel, related to terrorist financing. So
Yep.
yes, these will be top priority. And also, even without legislation, when we're talking about FinCEN and the mixer regulation, the government is at the height of its powers, the absolute height of its powers when we're talking about national security and sanctions evasion. So
Right.
any avenue the industry has pursued in courts related to whether this is a security, whether this is a commodity, those avenues are almost completely closed when it comes to national security. You're not going to get courts that are going to be friendly to the industry if they believe that ruling will damage national security.
Yep.
It's not done.
So, Adam, that's all really important stuff, and thanks for the perspectives there. And again, thank you all for joining us. Those of you who are with us, if you want to submit questions for Adam or myself, please do put them in the chat. So, Adam, we talked about that leads us kind of that next point around draft legislation. And by my last count, there are at least 9 substantial bills between both the House and the Senate. So, what's the kind of temperament for this discussion? I know the national security illicit finance is critical in DC. But when we look at the different types of bills, I'm just going through the list now. The Keep Your Coins Act, and I think Clarity for Payment Stablecoins Act. I mean, some of these are really technical, difficult conversations. And when I look at DC, I'm not a DC person. You've forgotten more about how Washington works than I'll ever know. But I see that the House barely was able to get a speaker in. Now they're barely able to get a fund the government, and now that's in 2 separate dates to make sure the government keeps getting funded. What's the likelihood of these moving forward, and what's kind of the perspective of these bills on the Hill?
So I guess we'll go in two facets. So there are the bills I would say that go in kind of the partisan bucket. So
Yep.
these would be kind of the Keep Your Coins Act and a couple others. These are usually pushed by legislators in the House, usually GOP legislators. They usually do not have bipartisan support, or even if so, they have 1 or 2 Democrats.
Yep.
The way you really want to think is if legislation is going to get passed, the way I usually like to start is can it get 60 votes in the Senate? Because the House is a majoritarian body. If the majority wants to pass something, it can pass something. In the Senate, outside of the budget reconciliation process, you need 60 votes to pass almost anything. So
Right.
if you don't have 10 Democratic co-sponsors, or in the Senate, if with the Senate Democratic majority, if you don't have 10 Republican co-sponsors, you're going to have a very hard time getting it passed or even getting to the floor to allow for passage.
Right.
One thing I think probably is disappointing to the industry about the 2-track CR that you mentioned that recently passed the House and is expected to pass the Senate any day now to fund the government is this laddered CR one of the reasons that the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, put this forward is he did not want an end of the year omnibus, which is usually referred to as the Christmas tree bill,
Yeah.
which is a bill that is passed around Christmas time between New Year's where all the legislators want to go home. They call it a Christmas tree because you try to stuff every single priority you have into it. It becomes a must pass bill. It's usually 3 to 5,000 pages. All different kinds of stuff get stuck in it. And typically, because it's must pass, sometimes you can get these discrete little priorities you have if you can convince leadership to get it in the bill, and then it's not so controversial that it's going to be considered a poison pill.
Right.
We're not going to have one of those this year because of this laddered CR. The deadline got moved back into the third week of January and then mid-February. There will be no omnibus that's moving that allows people to attach little pet projects to. So
Yeah.
that really does dim the hopes of some of these smaller, more discrete issues for crypto. One thing I would want to point out to people, I think was going to be one of the most important things that may be coming up, is the GAO ruled that SAB 121
Yes.
is a rule. And because it is a rule, it will go to the Senate floor for a resolution of disapproval. And that process may yield enough votes to pass that. It will need to pass both houses and then needs to be signed by the Senate. I mean, it
Yeah.
needs to be signed by the president. So you need to get over that veto threshold of 67 votes.
Yeah.
But considering how much criticism there has been of SAB 121, and
Hmm.
particularly really the biggest problem is not SAB 121 itself. And for people that don't know, it's the staff
It's the
accounting
process
bulletin.
behind SEB 121.
Well, and it's interaction with capital rules. So, for
Right.
example, if you're one of the largest custody banks in the world, you're heavily regulated by the OCC,
Yep.
FDIC, Fed, all different regulators. You have extensive capital requirements under Basel III. You're only allowed to hold a certain number of risky assets, and if, depending on their risk weighting, you have to hold capital against those assets, you only have a certain amount of regulatory capital you're allowed to have against this risky portfolio.
Yep.
Because SAB 121 basically requires you to treat any crypto asset, put them on your balance sheet as a risk asset, and have one-to-one collateral and capital against it, it really makes it so that a large custody bank cannot get into crypto and be a custody bank
Yep.
because they would breach their firm-wide capital levels by just holding a de minimis level of crypto.
Yep.
If SAB 121 were to be repealed or rejected as a congressional disapproval,
Hmm.
then it may potentially open up some of those firms. NASDAQ initially talked about getting into custody, they backed off. BNY was getting into crypto custody, they backed off.
That's right.
If you're able to see that SAB 121 goes away and you don't have this problem where SAB 121 is interacting with the capital rules to make it
Mhm.
so that a large player cannot get in the space,
Yep.
that could be very significant for the industry. So that's one thing really to follow is does it looks like it's going to be voted on in the next few weeks, and particularly what you're looking for there, especially in the Senate, is the margin. Are you going to get over 60 votes that support this resolution? Because if you only get 51, the
Yep.
assumption would be that President Biden will veto it because it's
Right.
his SEC that put forward the staff accounting bulletin. You would assume he supports the policy decisions of his SEC. He will
Yep.
veto the disapproval resolution. Then it will need to you will need to override the veto to get the rule rescinded.
Adam, to that point though, and I want to push back, not push back. I want to dive into that, and it's a really great synopsis of the latest on the GAO and its rendering of opinion on SAB 121. But you said something really interesting. We know the 60 vote threshold. How likely is that? I mean, let's be candid, right? We've got Elizabeth Warren, we've got Sheldon Whitehouse, we've got Sherrod Brown. Well, yeah, Sherrod Brown. Yeah,
Yeah,
we've got
sure, Brown.
several.
Heather
We've got
Brown's
a
good.
hard block of senators that are I think mainly Democrats. I think it could be wrong, and again, it's not a political
No, I think
conversation.
you're right. I think the most of this most strident anti-crypto forces are Democrats. I think that's a good
Right,
assessment.
and they are not going to, I would argue, be moved by a procedural. Hey, this should have been put in front of Congress in to disfavor the SEC. How likely is 60 votes in the Senate?
I wouldn't say it's likely. I mean,
Mhm.
the thing is, what you basically need to do is you need to get every moderate Democrat because you would assume you're probably going to get all of the Republicans. So you're probably
Yeah,
starting at 48, 49. Maybe you lose one.
yeah,
You start at 48 or 49, and then it's can you get enough? Because I would assume moderate Democrats would be the targets here, the Joe Manchins of the world, the Kristen Sinemas, people like that. Can you cobble together a coalition of enough of them
yeah,
to basically say that also one of the big things is not just the policy,
Hmm.
there will be procedural arguments you can make that may sway some of these Democrats, basically saying the SEC did not operate in a proper manner when it came to this rule. It should have been a formal notice and comment rulemaking. It should have gone through the regular process. The GAO, which is an independent body,
Yeah.
determined that it is a rule and that the SEC basically did not follow their own procedure they were supposed to when issuing it. That may be the most persuasive argument for certain moderate Democrats, basically saying, well, I may be indifferent on the policy,
Right.
but I don't approve of this process, and I want to vote against this as a way to show that I don't approve of the SEC acting in this manner and using this process in this manner. So that would be the thing I think the industry should really be thinking about is who are these moderate Democratic senators that have expressed willingness to work with the industry. One of them, I don't know if she was considered a moderate, but Kristen Gillibrand, who obviously has the bill with Senator Loomis, that would be a specific target you could go after. And that would be the thing is, can you count up the votes to get to 60? Believe the initial vote will be on a 50 vote threshold, but really what you need to do is get to 67 because you need to expect that the president's going to veto it. And then you
Yeah.
need to override the veto with 2/3 majority. So that's really the big thing to understand. I do think you will get the 2/3 majority in the House. I think there is enough criticism of SAB
Yeah.
121 among Democrats in the House
Like,
that you could get
sure.
there. It's just those 67 votes in the Senate. That's the hardest
Yeah.
path.
So Adam, it's interesting as you explained that, and again, thank you so much for that. It's all a numbers game ultimately from a voting perspective, but a lot of what you're alluding to there is this, and I'm just going to paraphrase. It's regulatory. Look, this is regulatory overreach. The GAO has confirmed our perspective. This is regulatory overreach that actually mirrors in many ways, or parallels rather, a lot of what the industry has been putting forward on, particularly targeting Chair Gensler and targeting the SEC from these court cases. So much of it is Administrative Procedures Act. You're just overstepping. I want to step out of the news reporting of that because it's very easy in the bubble of crypto to say, look, Chair Gensler's overstepping, the SEC is overstepping, they shouldn't be. Is this overstepping perspective believed in Washington? Does Washington think, hey, you know what, these regulators, they really are getting out of control? Again, exaggerating a little bit, but
No, I mean, well, depends who you ask. I mean, obviously, if you ask certain people on one side of the aisle, they would say 100% they are.
yeah,
I think one of the problems the industry has in certain of these enforcement actions is when you're a regulator, you get to pick and choose your battles. So you can pick the fraudsters and go after the fraudsters. You can pick when you're trying to claim that a specific token is a security, you can go and find the tokens where they specifically marketed it as a security, where they specifically said, you should believe in this because of the efforts we're doing. It makes it look much like a security in Howie. That's why court cases are a little harder to make that procedural argument because usually those enforcement cases really have facts and circumstances that a rational person could say, okay, well, maybe I don't approve of you doing this generally, but
yeah,
yeah, I mean, that's fraud. Let's go after the fraud. Let's lock up these guys that stole
yeah,
people's money, that didn't custody them. Makes complete sense. Like, you're not going to see many people saying they overreached in going after Sam Bankman Fried, or they
right,
overreached going after Quan and some of the other noted fraudsters.
sure,
So that is one of the difficulties when we're talking about the overreach on the enforcement side.
yeah,
Where the SAB 121 is different is the staff accounting bulletin, their staff. They wrote basically a document that because of the way the SEC rules work for public companies must follow the accounting guidance of the SEC Division on Corporate Finance. So when they come out with a staff accounting bulletin that says you must do this and treat this way, that is why the GAO said it was a rule. Because
right,
basically, and that is also why the main procedural argument is it should have been subject to notice and comment, where if it had, you would have seen many of the major custody banks file comments and say, maybe we support this in practice, but because of its interaction with your own capital rules and
right,
with Basel III, it doesn't work. So basically, even if you were trying to do one thing, it's having an application you completely didn't anticipate. And
yeah.
that's really the whole point of the notice and comment process is to give the regulators a heads up. Well, industry has a huge problem with this portion. When you go back and finalize the rule, maybe change it a little bit to address this legitimate concern that you maybe didn't think about. That
Right.
is not exactly the same conversations you have with the court cases.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because over the years, what my colleagues and I and you have seen when we talk about regulators and comment, the comments aren't just meant to be, "Hey, regulator, you're terrible, you're destroying the industry." It's, we understand the importance of this. here's the unintended consequences. Let's work on this, or let's let you understand some of our perspective. So there really is importance to the
Yeah,
comments and submissions to these
I
things.
would say one of the biggest things most people don't understand about the notice and comment process is people actually read the comments.
Yeah,
That's just like one thing that like people just assume they're gonna sign onto a letter. It's a messaging document. They send it into some portal, and then it goes
yeah,
into
disappears.
oblivion, and it's never seen again.
Yep,
I can tell you from personal experience, regulators do read the comments, and obviously, if you read the final rule, they have whole sections where they go through the comment letters and they respond to the criticisms, where they say this criticism was completely valid. We did not anticipate this, and
right.
we are changing the rule as a result. So I would
Yep,
always encourage people, think about your comments in that mind.
yep,
The regulators will read them, and you may be providing them a perspective they don't have, or bringing up to them an issue they may not have thought about. And if they don't have a good answer to it, you may achieve the policy outcome you want through that process.
that's right.
That's one thing people don't ever anticipate that the comments actually get read.
As I learned that over the years, and you certainly reiterated to me, Adam, I remember we recently submitted to the Department of Treasury IRS regarding gross proceeds. We've got it up on our website, and we put a short letter together. And then I had looked at the news, and tens of thousands of responses had come in. I think over 100,000 now. And I remember thinking, it's a conversation you and I had, the poor regulators and staff who have to read every single.
Yeah, and that's one of the things why I would always caution if an industry tries to spam the SEC or a regulator, which we've seen in the past,
Yes,
and
correct.
just submit a lot of bogus comments. That's a bad strategy because it means
Yeah,
that the good comment letters are not going to get as much time and
that's
attention
right.
because so much time needs to take to find the good from the bad.
Yep,
Whereas if you actually attempt to play ball with the regulator and follow the process as intended, you again may get the outcome you want. You may not, because they
yep,
may have a legitimate policy reason for ruling against you.
yes,
But I have seen many times, and I think you've seen this with Gensler's SEC. He
that's
will
right.
come out with a very broad, far-reaching proposal. The industry will come out very hard and say that there is a problem in XYZ ABC area. And then
Yep,
the final rule will come out in a very watered down fashion that removes almost all of the contentious provisions. That has
yep,
happened many times. And we saw that even in the custody space with the SEC
that's right.
custody rule, where they completely removed reference to digital assets once it got to the final rule
Yep.
because they didn't think they were on solid enough ground after they got the comments back.
Yep. So for our friends in the audience, our friends in the crypto industry, don't spam the regulators. Make it thoughtful, make it contemplative, give them a reason to understand the industry concerns. So Adam, we've only got a few minutes left, and I just want to hit on a couple things. We certainly mentioned SEC. We mentioned the SEC a lot. One of the things, and I almost feel like there's a hysteria around deadlines now, is SEC potential approval of spot Bitcoin ETF. And I think some dates, and you know better than I, so forgive me, I think a couple of dates came and went or very close to going. And then there's another series of deadlines, I believe, in January. Is it likely to happen, in your personal opinion?
So, in my personal opinion, I do think it's likely to happen. I would expect it, if I'm going to put a time frame, as sometime in the early new year.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my reason for thinking it's going to happen really differs from most perspectives in the industry.
Yeah.
My reason is more administrative. The amount of Bitcoin ETF filings that have been submitted are
Mm-hmm.
substantial. And each of
Yep.
these, especially the ones by the BlackRocks, by the other peoples of the
Yep.
world, these are extensive filings. They got very good lawyers. They paid very good money to put forward their legal arguments.
Yep.
The division of corporate finance is only so big.
Right.
It could, I mean, a corporate registration at the SEC, and they have to review each of these applications. And based on the court case against Grayscale, if they want to deny them, they need to have a fact specific record for each application to deny them. Just my own estimation, the amount of work that would take to create a fact specific record to deny each individual application and address all of those points would probably completely occupy the entire registration staff of the SEC for years, let alone every other registration they have to deal with. So, what I'm thinking is the most logical solution to that administrative problem the agency has, and I think you've seen Gensler telegraph this because he's been much
Yes.
more open to the possibility of it being approved, is likely what they will do is pick one of the much better applications. Let's say it's Kathy Woods, let's say it's BlackRock, let's say it's Fidel, whichever one you choose. Let's say it's
Yep.
Grayscale. And they will come up with essentially a rubric for approval. and basically say, we are approving because this, and this. And then they could use that similar rationale to approve all the others in a group. And
Yep.
again, not have that massive administrative burden on the agency. And then basically, once they clear all the backlog of spotted Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum spot ETFs, then they can get back to kind of doing their day job. And it also would give them a template going forward for future
I'm
applications.
with you on that, Adam, but let me push back on one thing, and I've heard this in industry conversation a lot. Let's hypothesize, for example, a BlackRock gets approved for a spot Bitcoin ETF, and they set up these parameters around here's why we're approving this. Is that not picking winners?
It could be, but it depends what those parameters are. So one of the notable things about the BlackRock application was this information sharing arrangement that they had, I believe, with NASDAQ and with
Right.
Coinbase in
Right.
order to get a certain amount of market data in order to prove that the market's not being manipulated.
Right.
If that kind of market service sharing agreement, that data agreement, was one of the pillars of approval, then that would potentially close out some of the smaller providers who would not be able
Sure.
to get such an agreement in place or would not have the financing to come to such agreement or build the systems to do it. So that's one area of picking winners and losers. But I think generally when they do finally approve an ETF, which I think they will, I think the guidelines will be pretty clear as to why it was approved and how you can get one approved in the future. And
Yeah.
as I said, it's for that administrative reason. The burden the circuit court put on the SEC is substantial if they want to deny these things.
Yeah.
A fact specific record on every application that addresses all of the relevant points. And not only that, it forces them to go back into previous ETFs they've approved based on the derivatives market and the swaps market in these same currencies, and they
Yep.
would have to show why they approved these in the past and give fact specific reasons why those were right and these are not. And that was
Right.
the biggest thing the court said is you're not treating like and like the same.
Right. Which
I
the
just
court noted as, look, you've got to treat like and like.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
I think that administrative burden for the agency is too
Yep.
great, and that is the reason I think kind of Gensler's kind of given up the ghost and saying and also from what I've heard, and you probably heard similar, the lawyers at SEC are actually now communicating with the lawyers at
Yeah.
these companies and
Yeah.
talking about specific discrete issues, which is
Yep.
the kind of process that happens prior to approval, not
Okay.
prior to rejection. In the past, usually
Right.
they just ghost them and don't ask
Right.
any questions, and then they deny.
Exactly.
So
You know,
we're in a very different space.
Adam, thank you so much. And we're just about out of time. I just want to wrap up with one last thing. We certainly talk about SEC a lot because it's certainly been most prominent in a lot of negative industry perspective, or the industry's negative perspective of regulators. But the importance of these kind of policy updates and the conversations you and I and Dina and others have is it's not just the SEC. We've got CFTC. I think the chair of the CFTC recently came out today or yesterday that nothing changes from the perspective of their enforcement activity moving forward. We've got FinCEN, we've got IRS, we've got all these other regulators. What are your thoughts about, I guess, the perspective of other regulators? Are they coming around to the inevitability of crypto in the United States, or is it still an uphill slog for the industry, do you think?
Well, I think it's both. So,
An inevitable
um,
slog.
and I will just give an example for a regulator that probably most people on this call have not been thinking about, which is the Consumer Financial Protection
Yes.
Bureau, CFPB. They came out with a digital wallet proposed rule
Yep.
a couple weeks ago around that would regulate big tech companies who want to offer digital wallets. So when you have regulators that are not even traditionally thought as regulating the space coming out with new rules to regulate parts of the and basically treat them as other institutions are treated that do digital banking, that is a tacit acknowledgement that the industry is penetrating, it is here to stay, and regulators are earnestly and I imagine slowly from an industry perspective, trying to wrap their arms around it and put rules of the road out so people can operate.
Yep.
But it's difficult. I mean, as most people know when they operate in the financial, there's a lot of regulators. There's the SEC, there's the CFTC, there's the OCC, there's the FDIC, there's the Fed, there's the Federal Home Loan Banking
Yep.
Association,
Yep.
there's the CFPB. So it's definitely not an easy process, and I think everything would be better if we had legislation that gave clear rules of the road
Yep.
that the regulators can then implement. While we're still in this space where we're very unlikely to get legislation, at least around the important issues that most people care about,
Yep.
it's going to be difficult to navigate the regulatory morass. It's just the kind of way it is, unfortunately.
Adam, really good point. I learn every time I speak to you and Dina. Dina, sorry you couldn't join us. You're missed. We'll have you next month. Adam, again, thanks so much. For those of you who joined us, thank you so much for tuning in. If any questions, drop us a note. Questions for Adam or myself or Dina, info@wsba.co. There's constantly stuff going on, Adam. I'm sure we'll have an entire new agenda next month. But again, thank you so much. It was great to see you. Thanks for being part of it.
Okay, thanks so much, Ron.
Take care.